Hey there guys, Pastor Gary here at Calvary Chapel, and we are coming to you once again with our series that we're calling our Study 66. And of course, this is a special feature that we allude to as our off-road, and we got some lovely signs behind us, and the guys are doing a great job. And it's to put you in the mind that every once in a while we are going to deviate, go into a little more detail, a little more rugged maybe. And if you're out joining with us on Sunday mornings, you know that we're going through the entire Bible, and as we study or as we go down maybe Route 66 books in the Bible, and that's why we're doing it. And so we hope that you come and join us. And if you have some friends or people you know that really are desirous to learn more about the Word of God, invite them out on a Sunday or have them tune in, and hopefully they'll learn a little bit more. We love to answer questions and to think about some things. I had someone yesterday, comes to my mind, who asked me about a comment that I made on Sunday. Why then in the millennial reign, in that 1,000 years reign, will the temple have sacrificing going on again if you have Christ as the king? And of course, great question, by the way, but the answer to it is because the sacrificial system, which we're going to get in today for a little bit, really is what reminds us of what Christ was going to do. Remember, at the time of Mount Sinai, the law and the sacrificial system, that was pointing us to Christ. Post-cross, when we think of sacrifice, when we think of those things, it points us back to what Jesus did. Even though Jesus will rule and reign in the millennial reign, there will still be unsaved people, and you will be able to point at the Temple Mount and say, they're still doing the sacrifices for what? To point us back to Christ, so that we know and we remember what Jesus did for us. So I hope that answers that. Well, right now I want you to just kind of picture something with me if you can. I want you to sort of close your eyes if you would, and I want you to picture standing in the wilderness. I've been to Israel a few times, and each time I go, I always enjoy seeing the Judean wilderness. And now, lest you're thinking of some foresty looking place, big, tall, majestic pine trees and that type of landscape that we tend to think of a wilderness with, lots of trees and everything else. The Judean wilderness, more importantly, the wilderness that runs south of that, where our scene is set today, you need to picture more of a desert. This is a deserted kind of place, is exactly where this is going to be. And I need you to think of this place that takes up mile after mile after mile of sort of the landscape that's down there. So it's almost otherworldly. You know, you almost think of like Mars or something like that when you're down in some of these places. Well, that's sort of where you and I, if we're children of Israel, we have now come as far as this place since we've left Egypt. And it's only been weeks ago that we've left Egypt, not a long time ago. And God, in His graciousness and in His urge to instruct us, has led us now to this place. Well, where are we standing? Well, you're standing at a place that the Arab-speaking people would say is Jabal Musa. Jabal Musa. Now, Jabal Musa simply means the Mount of Moses. That's where we are. We're at the Mount of Moses. Now, the Jewish people would refer to it as Har or Har Sinai. What does that mean? The Mount of Sinai. We're at what we call Mount Sinai is where we are. This is where God has brought us. There's a 7,500-foot mountain in front of us, and we notice there's all kinds of happenings around the top of it. God, in His speaking with Moses, has called him to come up there. So Moses grabs Joshua and they head up. We're still down here because we're too terrified really to go up. We want Moses to become the spokesman is what we want him to be. So Moses heads up and he spends time up there. And what could be going on? Well, God's giving him the rules for the people. God's giving him the rules that we can be the people of God, that we can follow God. Understand, we have been brought from Egypt, brought from the Egyptian way, led out into this wilderness. For what purpose? God is shaping and molding us to be His followers, to be His people. Remember, we have been chosen by God to be His people. This is important that He's now taking Egypt out of us and he's putting what he wants us to understand, what he wants us to know in us. You know, it's funny, by the way, because I looked up Mount Sinai, and I found what I thought was interesting. You can hike to the top of Mount Sinai, and it'll take you about 2.5 hours, is what they're saying. Whether that's true or not, and if you want to jog up, you can probably do it a lot easier, that's for sure. So anyway, we will be here at the beginning of Leviticus, the beginning of the book of Leviticus. That's where we are. We will be here for a month until the end of Leviticus. The entire book basically takes shape and form right here at Mount Sinai is what happens. The other thing interesting is, once we get moving from Mount Sinai, the book of Numbers, some people are like freaked out, like, oh, the book of Numbers, what's that going to be about? It's all about numbers. No. We begin our wandering through the wilderness again. And so stick with us as we go into the book of Numbers next week, and you will find us back on our trek across the desert is what you're going to see. And it's very important that we understand about the laws. We can break down the book of Leviticus this way. First of all, chapters 1 through 17 we'll call section 1, and that leaves us with, of course, 18 through 27, and that's section 2. So you have 2 sections, 27 chapters in this particular book that I think is important that you will know about too. First 17 chapters deal with a word that we call sacrifice. The first 17 chapters are going to deal with God telling the people about a sacrificial system. If you want to draw close to God, if you want to know the way to God, it's going to be through sacrifice. This is what he's telling his people. You're going to have to sacrifice. The second section that we're talking about, and of course that's 18 through 27, sacrifice first, sanctification second. Now you go, sanctification? What does sanctification mean? Well, sanctification is the process that God takes us through to do what? He's creating us a desire to be holy, to walk holy, to live that kind of life. Holiness meaning separated unto God. When you separate unto God, that means you got to leave the world behind. So you're leaving the world behind to come into relationship, a full relationship. So we are going to the way of God. How do I find God? How do I get into relationship? That's through sacrifice. Well, how do I continue my walk? What do I do to walk with him? Well, that's called the process of sanctification. If you're a believer today, you are in the process of sanctification. He is working on you daily. He's rubbing the thorny stuff. He is taking that rough edge and he's working on that. The things you used to think were okay, you no longer do. Things you may have been involved with, you no longer want to be involved with. He's working that process out in you. So remember, sacrifice and sanctification. Now, why is sacrifice so important? Well, you got to go all the way back to Genesis. And as you go back to Genesis and you remember Adam's walking with the Lord, Eve comes along, and things seem to be going so well until, of course, Eve is deceived in the garden. Adam falls right in line, and now sin has entered into the garden. And so when God comes down to meet with his children, what are they standing there in? Well, they're standing there in fig leaves. They're standing there in some kind of vegetation, right? Because they think in their meager efforts, they can provide that way to stay in relationship with God. Maybe it's one of those things like, maybe he'll never notice, you know? Well, God does, of course. So what does God do? The next thing we know, Adam and Eve aren't standing there in fig leaves. Adam and Eve are now standing there in animal skins. What, pray tell, must have happened to those animals? Well, obviously they were killed. God used the skins of those animals to cover up Adam and Eve. Very symbolic to you and I of our sin having to be covered. Could not be covered by man's efforts. That's religion. Man tries to cover his inconsistencies and so forth with his own efforts. Cain and Abel in the scripture, as you look at Cain and Abel, you know, Cain, of course, came along with what? Cain came along with his own way of doing things. He said, hey, here's some vegetation. I'm going to offer this up. And of course, Abel offered up something that cost him, is what it did. And so we see the same thing being repeated throughout. And this is what mankind has been doing throughout time. God says, no. It's going to take sacrifice. Something must die, blood must be shed. Why? Because we're told in the scriptures, if there's no shedding of blood, there can be no forgiving of sins. Sin costs. This is what the book is telling you and I. This is the point I want you to understand more than anything else today. Sin costs. It costs spiritual life. It costs physical life. It costs relationship. It kills everything it comes in contact with. The book of Leviticus takes us to Mount Sinai where God is saying, guys, these are the rules. Why? Because he wants you to understand that when we sin, do you ever wonder why? You stop and you think the Bible is such a bloody book. I mean, there's so much blood being shed in the Bible from Genesis all the way through to Revelation. Sacrifice, blood, Jesus Christ on the cross, dying and shedding his blood. It's because sin matters. It costs. There's a heavy price. Remember, our sin causes death. That's what it does. And God is giving the picture to his children here, and he's saying, guys, this is what it's going to do. Now, real quick, though, he doesn't end with the sacrifice phase and say, okay, sacrifice is paid, that's it. No. God doesn't want us walking around sort of like zombies, halfway in, halfway out. He still desires relationship with us. So he provides the way of relationship. He sacrifices. His son Jesus was given for our sin. But then he also wants us to walk holy. Why? Because he's holy. He says, I want you to be holy because I'm holy. Well, what does that mean? We have to live a life of separation. Separation from what? One another? No. Separation from sin. Separation from that life we used to live. So he starts us on a process where we now continually are confronted by our sinful nature, but he also gives us these wonderful processes to go through where he's continuing to work on us. He wants us to walk in a sanctified manner is exactly what he wants us to do. The word holy appears more in the book of Leviticus than it does anywhere else in the Bible. You see the word holy, I believe it's 88 times or something like that. That's because to God, that's what is so important. So today, I want you to walk away from the book of Leviticus with the idea of the perfect sacrifice. Jesus Christ was sacrificed for you and I. But secondly, it doesn't just end with sacrifice. Now it's the process of walking with him. That kind of sums up the book of Leviticus, quite honestly. Sacrifice and sanctification. I hope you have a great day in the Lord today. And please, feel free to tune in anytime. If you have questions, call us at the office and let us know. God bless you.